Dead Space 3 was developed by Visceral and published by EA, releasing on the 5th of February 2013 for PS3, Xbox 360, and Windows. On the build-up to its release, the hype was real. Dead Space 1 was a revelation, and its follow-up had fast become the face of horror on the 7th generation of consoles. So when the rumour mill started up on what Dead Space 3 had in store for us, with Isaac and a shadow version of him playable in co-op, which would showcase the mental fatigue our main lad was under, I was frothing with anticipation. Flash forward a few months to E3 2012, and we finally got a first look. A story trailer followed by a live on-stage demo. The story detail had been way out, but the broad strokes were bang on the money. A full co-op experience as Isaac leaves the confines of a mining vessel and a space station, and instead heads to an icy planet to uncover the origins of the markers. The marketing guys at EA got me hook, line and sinker. And this was only compounded when I got my hands on a demo in the January of 2013, where I could finally experience co-op action with a good friend. If only this honeymoon period could have lasted, as by the time the game arrived and I was done with it, I remember walking away from the experience feeling like I'd just been backhanded. The sting of disappointment was a cruel mistress, and one that stayed with me for years. So when I was faced with returning to Dead Space 3, to say I was apprehensive would be an understatement. But with the passing of time, I was hopeful that maybe it wasn't as bad as I remembered. After all, since doing these reviews, there's been countless times that I've realised how much my opinion has changed, and I prayed, hoped, and dreamed that I would walk away 10 years later a changed man. A man who would shout from the rooftops how great Dead Space 3 is, how it's criminally underrated and deserves your time. But sadly, after finishing the game, that dream is nothing short of a nightmare. Dead Space 3 is a disappointment, and this review I'm going to explain why that is, the impact studio interference has on what could be a great game, and how Visceral has thrown away everything that makes the Dead Space series special to chase wider mass appeal. As usual, this review will be split into plot, gameplay and presentation, and for those that haven't played Dead Space 3 before, don't worry, I'll be keeping this light on spoilers. Now let's dive in. DS3 begins on the icy planet of Tau Volantis in 2314. A necromorph outbreak is in full swing, and we fill the boots of Sovereign Colony's armed forces soldiers Tim Kaufman and Sam Ackerman, as they are sent searching for the Codex, a device powerful enough to end the nightmare which has engulfed the colony. After surviving multiple run-ins with the recently deceased, and the force of Mother Nature herself, we soon learn that it's all been in vain. The research expedition they're taking part in has gotten out of hand, and the only option left is containment.
You love the Earth, son. Your mom and dad.
Yes, sir, of course.
Good. Glad to hear that.
With that bleak view into the past, the game flash forwards 200 years, and we find our main man Isaac Clarke living on the New Horizons lunar colony. It's been 3 years since the events on Titan Station, and since then, Isaac has been in hiding from EarthGov alongside Ellie Langford. But due to Isaac's inability to move on with his life, and Ellie wanting to seek out and end the marker's influence across the stars, Isaac has lost her, and in turn, everything he cares about, and he wallows in self-pity. The pity party is cut short when Isaac is joined by some unexpected visitors, bringing with them news that communication with Ellie has been lost, and as an expert on markers, only Isaac can find her and help complete their mission to save the world. Before he has time to tell them where to stick it, Explosions rock the lunar colony as unitologist fanatics led by Jacob Arthur Danick seek to find Isaac and bring him to justice for destroying 2 markers which, in their mind, denied humanity its ascension. This bombastic opening sets the pace for what's to come across the story of Dead Space 3. It's Isaac and Carver versus unitology, as the inner circle of the religion close in around every corner as the duo strive to end the marker's influence for good. The plot of Dead Space 3 has a lot of spinning plates. You have the interpersonal relationships of Isaac, Carver, Ellie and the rest of the crew, the introduction of the inner circle and their militaristic style of unitology, the events that happened 200 years ago on Tau Volantis, and finally, the purpose of the markers and their ultimate goal. It's a lot. Now, the reason for this increase in scope is unfortunately a result of EA and Visceral's vision going into the game. Visceral had always intended to end the series on the 3rd entry, and as such, they felt like they had to answer some of the burning questions that underpin the franchise. They felt they could no longer seed the ground. It was time for a harvest. And the unfortunate reality is this is delivered at the expense of the wider cast. Now, is it due to the sheer amount of characters DS3 tries to juggle? Potentially. I mean, the cast here is much larger than the 2 characters we had with us in DS1 and 2. The 3rd entry chucks 6 our way. 6! And within this, we have 2 playable protagonists, a love triangle, and a betrayal. It's one hell of a lot. And those spinning plates soon begin to fall. Danick, the main protagonist, fails to add any intrigue or mystique into the experience. Ellie and Isaac's relationship happens, but the connection between them doesn't create any emotional attachment. And Carver's entire story is relegated to co-op side missions which, if playing solo, make him redundant. I just wish the Visceral had gone into this with tempered scope and focused on the most important aspects of the franchise, the mystery and the characters. The first game is the story of the Ishimura. The second game is the story of Isaac overcoming his demons. And the third is a story about everything fucking else. By bloating to this extent, it dabbles into everything, but never focuses, ending up becoming a sea of noise with no clear voice. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some high points. The lore in both document and audio logs are vast. The environmental storytelling told through the world is intriguing, but it fails at the basics, creating characters I don't care about, and turning the whole religion of unitology from what felt like an immovable repressive force in the other games into a physical threat which can be tricked, evaded, and overcome with relative ease. Jesus Christ, the amount of times Danick has Isaac in his grasp, only to go on a typical bad guy monologue and let him escape, is mind-blowing. He's incompetent, a complete moron, a fucking Tory.
Isaac, as you can personally attest...
Fuck off.
There's so much I could talk through when it comes to this plot, but the main issue comes back to one thing: scale. And by trying to include everything to tie the franchise up, they ended up undercutting what it needed to do, which was deliver an emotionally engaging story. Dead Space 3 sticks true to what the series is known for, with stasis, kinesis, and an assortment of tools to bring destruction to the hordes of necromorphs which hide around every corner. But there's a number of changes which separate DS3 from the other entries in the series. For starters, and the one that has the biggest impact on the overall experience, the game is fully playable in co-op.
Yay!
And its inclusion hurts more than it helps. Now, before I get into why this is, I'll give you a bit of background on why it was included in the first place. And, spoiler alert, it's all EA's fault. Work on Dead Space 3 began in 2011, Dead Space 2 had released to glorious praise, but even with reviewers and fans alike basking in how great the experience was, EA wasn't happy. The game had failed to match their lofty sales goals, and they didn't have to look far to see what success could look like. So did they do the wise thing, double down on what makes the series unique? Slash the sales goals and dial it down to a smaller experience to make it stand out from its contemporaries?
I didn't do fucking shit!
They said, more action, less horror, and for good measure, chuck in microtransactions. Everyone loves those. It's obvious how Resident Evil's success 2 years prior influenced Dead Space 3, but whereas Resident Evil 5 in many ways grew from what came before in Resident Evil 4, Dead Space 3 cut so many corners to make its vision work, it feels like a half-baked version of what came before. So I've danced around it long enough. What did adding co-op impact? Well, there's two major things. For starters, having another player with you gives you solace. It's no longer you versus the world. You've got someone to watch your back. And this sense of relief destroys any tension, fear, and atmosphere the game tries to create. Which, for what is an action horror series that relied on its atmosphere, its absence is sorely missed. The second and most damaging impact co-op has to the experience is the lack of interactivity. Kinesis has always been an ability with which you can grab basically any item around the environment, from dead necromorph blades to bins, lobbing them at supersonic speed to cripple the enemies and in turn save resources. In DS3, this is scaled back dramatically, with the only items affected by kinesis being necroblades or explosive canisters. The environment is like when you take a kid into a gift shop. You can look, but you can't touch. Now I assume this is a result of having two playable characters inhabiting one area. Two loads of kinesis moving and shaking the environment would put too much strain on the game engine, resulting in drop frames or straight crashes. And the evidence for this is clear as day, as corpses of your enemies disappear before your eyes, leading to moments where you go to grab a necroblade, only for the target to vanish, resulting in a miskinesis and an opportunity to deal hefty damage. It's such a shame, as by scaling back on kinesis's environmental interaction, it shatters any immersion the game is trying to create. For every failed grab, I was reminded I was playing a game with set rules, and it felt like a true backstep from what was standard all the way back in 2008. Now there is one choice which I did appreciate with the co-op inclusion, and that's the asymmetrical dementia. Across the game, both Isaac and Carver will experience visions thanks to the marker's influence, and the great thing is, only the one character will be able to see those. There's an entire side objective plot built around Carver's family, which is where this mechanic truly shines. Carver may simply be standing still, but through the headset my co-op buddy was able to explain what he was seeing, and my only job was to cover his ass as he confronted Carver's inner demons. It's a great idea, both consistent with the wider series and more importantly, one which promotes multiple playthroughs to be able to experience each character's unique visions. And it adds purpose to the side objectives, which are built into the vast majority of missions, rewarding those who partake in them with fresh challenges or character pieces that make them worth your time. And speaking of challenge, thanks to having double the firepower, Dead Space 3 gives the necromorphs added durability and more importantly, speed to close down on our heroes. Now to offset this, they introduce a dodge. With a double tap of R2, Isaac will roll. This dodge can be performed in 4 directions, and it's chock full of iframes. Now, I have to admit, it never got old rolling out of the way of a jumping necromorph, popping up and blowing them to Kingdom Come. I'm a sucker for a skillful use of a dodge or a parry in near enough every game they can be included in. But what makes this mechanic shine is the impact of getting it wrong, the damage you take by not reacting in time, and the regret that is singed into every fiber of your being. Unfortunately, Dead Space 3 doesn't commit to this. The game throws health kits at you like there's no tomorrow, and if you somehow use them all up, you can craft them for bugger all. The amount of healing items on hand at any one time degrade the mechanical challenge of perfect play, and to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that people got through the experience without ever using the dodge, as going blow for blow in Necros is now a viable strategy for success. The final two changes I'll mention here are with the weapons and the in-game economy. Let's start with the weapons. In the previous two mainline entries, Isaac had access to 4 weapons at any one time. Each one served a specific purpose, giving a primary attack and an alternate fire, which would change how that weapon could be used. For example, a plasma caster had its standard fire, with its alternate used to switch between a horizontal or vertical axis for targeted dismemberment. A pulse rifle would allow for sustained fire, and its ult would give a grenade launcher for quick kills or, more importantly, crowd control. The joy was in figuring out which gun suited your style, the specific best use scenario, and having a mix which could be swapped to at any given time to overcome the approaching threat. And all this while managing the individual ammo counts for each weapon, forcing you to save up your more powerful caches for when the need is dire. Dead Space 3 does things its own way. It introduces weapon crafting. By visiting one of the many crafting tables across the game, Isaac can create 2 individual weapons to carry around at any one time. These guns are created by finding blueprints, which then can be mixed with different attachments to augment their purpose. Each individual gun can be mixed and tailored to whatever the player sees fit. Do you like the line gun, but wish you had a shotgun for close encounters? Go for it. Do you want an element gun, whereby you freeze the enemy in place and then melt them with a flamethrower? Sure. The choice on offer is insane, giving the player the ability to fuse the iconic arsenal of the previous 2 games into world-ending Deathbringers. And that's all well and good, but the issue is, when you've created your perfect gun, your magnum opus, there's no need for any further experimentation. For me, that gun was a javelin gun, which I augmented into a machine gun, firing out devastating javelins at turbo speed, and then, when I wanted to end something immediately, I had a rocket launcher with 0 splash damage, so I could essentially hit the nuke button whenever I felt like it. It was absolutely busted. Now the logical person would think, well, there must be some reason to mix up the styles like there was in the first 2 games. There must be something to stop me just blasting everything to Kingdom Come with the rocket launcher whenever I feel like it. And yeah, the answer would be different ammo caches just like in the previous games. But logic doesn't seem to fit in with Dead Space 3, as here, they've done away with this, streamlining ammunition into a shared resource across all guns. This change means there's no need to manage your stocks, to think about when to use a specific type. You can fire anything you want until your heart's content, and if you somehow start running low, you can craft additional rounds for essentially nothing at the crafting tables. In giving the player more choice up front with fully customizable guns, in reality, it reduces choice, as now you have a maximum of 2 guns with 2 alternate fires, reducing the choice of how you engage from 8 firing types to 4. And as resources shared across them, you might as well just build one gun which can do everything, and stick with it for the entire experience. There's no need to be tactical, to manage your ammo stock, to use the right tool for each encounter, as you've custom made a tool which can do it all. Now I like the idea of building your own personal gun which can fully support your playstyle, but with no downsides to using this gun in perpetuity, it actively reduces any decision making in moment-to-moment gameplay. It's a damn shame, as to make this crafting system work, it needs to be built into every element of the game, and that's where the in-game economy comes in. The previous entries relied on credits. The simple premise was you find these across the environment or by killing enemies, and you would use them to either buy resources in the form of health kits or ammo, or you could sink your credits into nodes to make your existing kit more powerful. And if you wanted more credits, you'd have to sell off your health and ammo to get more. It promoted a choice in how low you run yourself on these vital resources to allow the player to scale up on the upgrades to match newer, more powerful enemies which would appear the further into the experience you go. This system worked without issue in both Dead Space 1 and 2, but with the introduction of weapon crafting, DS3 had an opportunity to try something new. It binned off credits and replaced them with components. Now there's far too many here to break down each individual component, but the basic gist is some can be broken down from your health and ammo to allow for health upgrades or armor upgrades for your suit, but the vast majority are found by using a scavenger robot, which will find random amounts upon its return to a crafting station, and these can then be used to make new gun parts or unlock additional circuits for upgrading the weapon even further. To me, this extra complication into the in-game economy solely exists to promote microtransactions. You see, each scavenger bot takes approximately 10 minutes to return, and when it does and you get everything bar the one material you really need, you can choose to pass over this entire system and buy the resources using real-world currency on the PlayStation Store. Now, I never felt the urge to do it, and instead would just send the bot out time after time in the hopes of something coming in I actually needed. It was a chore, and felt like busy work rather than a way to deepen the experience. The question I asked myself while writing this is, did the economy work better in DS1 and 2, with the choice on how quickly you power up depends on your play and how much risk you want to take by limiting resources, or RNG, where you send out a bot and hope for the best? The answer is obvious. A gameplay-centric economy which underpins every action you take serves the game. One which is created with a backdoor to bypass partaking in it entirely is as transparent as a pane of glass. My mind is drawn to one conclusion. EA must have mandated this change, and all it's done is provide extra confusion, more busy work, and move away from what works so flawlessly in the previous titles. I like how DS3 tried new things for the franchise, introducing co-op, adding full weapon customization, but it's like as if it did these by using a monkey's paw. Each new addition has unintended consequences which pull Dead Space 3 further away from what came before, and unintentionally take away from the experience, rather than add to it. Now I realise over the course of this review, every positive I've stated has then been partially, if not all the way, undone by its negatives. And well, that isn't going to change in the presentation front. Let's start with the positives. Returning to score the game are composers Jason Greaves and James Hannigan, and it's in this entry that I feel the musical accompaniment reaches its crescendo. The vistas across the game are extraordinary, from the frozen tundra of Tau Volantis to the minefield in orbit above the planet, and it's here that the soundtrack is given room to rise to the surface. In all the action, it's hard to pinpoint its presence, but in the quiet moments, its majesty stops you in its tracks. It's spectacular. This stellar score is backed up by performances from all the cast which sell its characters. Now, as stated in the plot section, the writing doesn't do them justice, with most of the cast feeling cookie cutter, or at best, half-baked. But the cast believe in who they are playing, and the performances shine through the dullness. Now, speaking of characters, eagle-eyed viewers might have picked up on a change with one in particular.
Captain, is this him?
Oh, nice lovely new eye.
You dirty, dirty bastard.
Now, as I stated earlier, the vistas across the game are incredible. But for the most part, the majority of the game, you'll be dealing with small corridors leading into box rooms, where every opportunity, a vent will break, and a necromorph will appear behind you, rushing for your blood. It's the same setup as the Ishimura, and so on paper, I shouldn't have an issue, right?
Wrong.
The difference is, in DS1, atmosphere is king. The environments and layouts were similar, but each area had a feel, a sense of lingering dread, and the set dressing that accompanied each area brought it to life. In DS3, you may explore a decrepit ship, an ice planet, a cityscape, but there's no reason to absorb your surroundings, to take things slow, to feel fear. You feel in control, powerful, and so each area you progress through at pace, rolling through doors and joking with your partner over in-game chat. There's no chance for the game to breathe and create the tension which would make the game ascend above a boilerplate third-person shooter. And the killing blow for Dead Space 3 here, this is the first time that entire segments of maps are repeated. Now I swear I saw the same icy dead end where I could use a scavenger bot time after time throughout Tau Volantis. And no, it wasn't because I was running in circles. This same square is used time after goddamn time, and without effective atmosphere to draw you deeper into the world, the entire experience feels less ambitious and more lazy, like corners were cut to provide on-paper expansive variety. Now I played the game through on the PS3, and as such it meant I experienced the game in glorious 720p 30 FPS, and I'm glad to say the game ran perfectly. I experienced no drop in frame rate across the entire experience, and as much as I have dunked on the environments being generic or lacking interaction, the game itself is still beautiful to look at. The vacuum of space and the snowy tundra on the planet itself both look incredible, and when the action intensifies, there are some incredibly beautiful shots. This moment in particular stood out as one which physically made me gasp in delight. Now if you have an Xbox Series or PC, I'd imagine those would be the best way to experience the game today, as DS3 has been upscaled to provide better frame rates and higher resolutions. But if you're like me and want an authentic experience, the PS3 or Xbox 360 is still a great choice. And with drop-in, drop-out co-op available through peer-to-peer connection, it's great to see the main draw of Dead Space 3 is still intact all these years later. Now it does baffle me why EA refused to put out 4K or even HD versions of the original trilogy onto modern platforms. But with the success of Dead Space Remake, he is hoping we get to experience 2 and 3 with a fresh coat of paint and new ideas to refine and elevate what was here as a base experience. Because one thing's for certain, Dead Space 3 certainly needs it. Dead Space 3 is a game which does things differently. It introduces a new way for us to play with seamless co-op, side objectives for those that want new challenges or to uncover more of Carver's past. It provides a new weapon crafting system, and it does all this while trying to tie the series up. Unfortunately, with all this change, it can't capture the magic which made Dead Space 1 and 2 masters of the action horror genre. Something was lost in the mix, and the consequence was a loss of atmosphere. And for Dead Space, that's a critical component that without it degrades the experience to nothing more than a basic third-person shooter. For my money, Visceral bit off more than they can chew here, and in trying to rush to the end of the story, they threw away what made the series so unique. The mystery was gone, the characters were weak, and the plot, upon finishing the game, doesn't offer the closure which many were expecting. Now, there is a final piece of DLC in Dead Space 3 Awakened, which, to this day, I've never experienced. So maybe that's where the full story comes to a decisive end. But to me, a game should stand on its own. It shouldn't need DLC to tie things up in a neat package. And I leave Dead Space 3 feeling much like I did going in. The game is a disappointment. A bum note in what had been a flawless series in the previous 2 entries. And it was no wonder the series was left floating in the void of space, seemingly in permanent hibernation following this outing. Thankfully, there is hope. With Motive's Dead Space Remake, the series has the best chance in living again, and I hope the team have a chance to take what was here as a base game and fully re-envision it, to take its core ideas and see them through to their full potential. But we'll have a long wait to see if this potential future comes to pass. That brings this review to a close. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, then don't forget to put a like on it and consider subscribing for more Dead Space content. Up next on the channel, I'll be experiencing Dead Space 3 Awakened for the first time, so make sure to hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Now, if you're still craving a bit more from me, consider checking out my podcast, In PS We Trust. It's a PlayStation podcast where me and my co-host discuss the latest news, rumours and hype for all things PlayStation, and of course, survival horror. It's available on all major podcast services and right here on YouTube. I'll leave links in the description. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.